Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Henry Smith, Senior Programme Manager at the Centre for Ageing Better. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes for you. All attendees will be muted throughout. However, please feel free to use the chat function to introduce yourselves to each other and to share any insights or links to resources that you think may be of interest to others. And note, please make sure you're sharing with everyone, otherwise Zoom defaults to just the panelists. We've had lots of advanced questions, and I'm sure you will have many more as we go along. If you have any questions, we invite you to send these through on the Q&A button and not the chat. Only the questions from the Q&A box will be picked up by myself, the chair. You should be able to see this button in a ribbon at the bottom of your screen. We know that there may be lots of questions and we may not have time to respond to all of them in the time available. If there are others that we don't cover, then we'll do our best to cover them after the event. Today's webinar will be recorded and made available to watch on our YouTube channel after the event. There will also be subtitles in the on-demand video if you should need them. If you're watching this on demand and would like to join a conversation online, please use #GoodHomeInquiry. So today's webinar launches the final report and recommendations of the Good Home Inquiry, an evidence-based analysis of England's housing policies to determine the causes of and solutions to the poor quality of so much of our housing. The inquiry was launched in July of last year, commissioned by and supported by the Centre for Ageing Better, and led by an independent panel chaired by David Orr. The three panel members are Lord Victor Adbawale, Vidya Alexson, and Pat Ritchie. At Ageing Better, we commissioned a series of underpinning research projects to support the work of the inquiry. This research examines how we experience our homes to inform future solutions. The report, published today, and the link is in the chat now, summarises the state of England's housing, what needs to be done to address the challenges and barriers, and the policy options to make meaningful change. So I'm really pleased to introduce our speakers today. First of all, we have David Orr, the chair of the Good Home Inquiry. David is a hugely experienced leader in both executive and non-executive roles. He has over 30 years experience in chief executive roles, most recently at the National Housing Federation, having previously been chief executive of the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations and of Newlon Housing Trust. So I'm going to introduce David to talk about the work of the Good Home Inquiry.
Yeah, my video started. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming along to this webinar. As Henry has already pointed out, we have today launched the report of the Good Home Inquiry. And what I want to do here is just to give you some flavour of the way that we approach the task and some of the recommendations that we've made. A little bit of context first. We set off on this particular journey because the Centre for Ageing Better, with its mission of trying to ensure that everyone should have a healthy and fulfilling later life, explored those things that are likely to be barriers to get in the way of being able to deliver that. And of course, in the centre of that is the quality of our homes. If we have a good home, if we have a safe, warm, secure, affordable home, then that gives us the confidence to be able to lead the rest of our lives, a great building block, a great base from which to go out and fulfill our own potential. I think in beginning to explore the quality of our homes and some of the housing issues, we all know that we've been building far too few homes for far too long. We all know that we've lacked a proper housing strategy so that we don't have a sense of there being shared objectives about what we are trying to achieve. and that things have got really very difficult for very many people. But almost all inquiries into housing focus on building new homes. That's absolutely essential. We need to build new homes. But there's very little attention paid to the challenges of our existing homes. And if we're lucky, we might build 200 or 220,000 new homes in a year. We've got 24.5 million already a year. So there is a huge requirement to think about what we can do to ensure that our homes are fit for purpose for all of us. And I do think this is a really important challenge. I think, understandably, we all of us have a sense of our own responsibility in respect of our own home, whether we're renters or owners. We all have our own obligations to keep our homes in decent repair. But that ignores the fact, if we limit our thinking to that, it ignores the fact that our homes are a fantastic national asset when you look at them collectively. And if you think of it in those terms and then begin to explore what the difference is if we have good homes for the nation, not just for the individuals who live in them, but for the nation. If we were able to improve the quality of our homes, it would have an immediate and important effect on reducing demand for the health service. The relationship between poor homes and poor health has been known, surveyed and commented on for generations, and yet we don't have enough connection between health prevention work and the conversation about housing. If we had good energy efficient homes that were easy to heat, as well as the increase in comfort for those people living in their homes, that's a big step towards helping us meet our climate change obligations. And of course, as we all now know, when there is, given the imminence of COP26 and the obligations that we as a nation are signing up to, we know we cannot meet those obligations unless we decarbonize all of the homes in our economy. We've also had the COVID pandemic. Now, we know that COVID didn't hit everyone equally. We know that there were groups of people for whom COVID was a much more serious and threatening illness. And these were people, we know about it, people on low incomes, people in overcrowded homes, people from a number of different Black and minority ethnic households, older people, a range of people, all exacerbated by poor quality housing. So if you live in a poor quality home, your potential recovery from COVID is less than if you live in a good quality home. We have known all of this about our homes for far too long. We know that trip hazards, a major cause of falls in the home, are a major reason for older people entering hospital. And we know in terms of social care, for example, that if your home is a difficult home to live in, you're more likely to need residential care than if your home is genuinely fit for purpose. We also know that there are a whole range of different things that kind of exist as barriers to people investing in their homes. We have complex and complicated relationships with our homes. We have an emotional relationship with it. We have an emotional attachment, very often because whatever the quality of the home, that is the place where good things have happened to us, where we've lived an important part of our lives. So we have a very strong emotional attachment. But many people know that either now or in the future, their homes need work doing on them, but they don't know where they can access funding, either grant funding when that's available, or even access to affordable loans. People don't know where they can get advice, information that they can trust. They don't know how to assess the quality of their homes. And so in the work of the Good Home Inquiry, we have looked exhaustively at previous pieces of research, we've commissioned new research, but running all the way through the work that we've done, we have tested our thinking time after time with people who are living in poor quality homes now and saying, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And that testing and the deliberative work conducted for us by Ipsos Mori and Britain Thinks has been absolutely central to the work that we've done and the recommendations that we have reached. In summary, the recommendations that we have for our homes, to challenge this, to make a difference. Well, first of all, we need a national strategy. We need some sense that this is a national priority and that government has an important role to play. Not necessarily the main funding role, although there will always be some people for whom grant funding is necessary, but there is a leadership role, a kind of definition of the objectives that we are trying to reach as a nation, and the need for that to be owned centrally by government with a minister who is a champion for this work at cabinet level. And then we need a network of organizations that are local delivery agencies, what we are calling good home agencies. Agencies that exist in every local authority in the country, building on many of the things that are already there, like HIAs and care and repair and a number of others. Oh, some slides have appeared. Well. So a good home agency in every local area, providing that kind of information and advice, the finance, the home repairs, energy retrofit services, but critically being a trusted place for that information and advice to be available. We absolutely need new investment. If we spend the money that we need to spend on decarbonising our homes, that's tens of billions of pounds, maybe even hundreds of billions of pounds over time. So if we're going to do that, we also need to be investing in the other things that would make our homes better, that would make our homes more fit for us to live in for longer. And so we need private investment. We need consumer finance as a key component of this new strategy, as well as the possibility perhaps of government guaranteeing loans. We studied in detail the KfW Bank in Germany, which has been able to provide subsidized loans underwritten by the German government, and as a result of that was able to help 380,000 households last year to improve their homes and make them more energy efficient. And we absolutely have to see housing as a key part of preventative health strategies.
Sorry to interrupt, David. But a 1 minute warning.
Thank you. It's very clear that we have somehow managed to unlearn things that when the health service was set up in 1948, we knew, because housing and health were in the same department. We understood that getting housing right was a key determinant of good health. So we need to re-engage with that, reconnect. We need ICSs and others to be thinking, what is their housing strategy? So overall, there are a number of very specific recommendations, including proposals for a home MOT. But I think what we've suggested, many organizations end up suggesting in their own context. We need a national strategy and we need a network of trusted local delivery agencies. The fact that we don't get that very often is not a reason not to try. And I think that the recommendations that we've made in the Good Home Inquiry report, backed up by the way we've tested those with people who've got a whole range of different issues and challenges in their own homes, gives me confidence that we are making sensible, serious, deliverable recommendations to deal with a problem which is important, it is now urgent, and it is something that we can do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Excellent presentation and really hitting home just how urgent the nature of this challenge is, but also the opportunities that exist, particularly with the decarbonisation agenda, to be making lasting changes to our homes. I'm delighted to say we now have Sue Adams. So Sue is an OBE. She is Chief Executive of Care and Repair England, as well as being at the forefront of developing frontline help for older people living in poor housing. Sue has contributed to successive government's policies concerning housing and ageing, and was closely involved in the creation of the cross-government strategy, Lifetime Homes, Lifetime Neighbourhoods. She currently chairs the National Housing and Ageing Alliance and a Home Adaptations Consortium, and serves on a wide range of committees, including the Department of Health's Integration Partnership Board, and previously on DCLG's Housing Sounding Board, DWP's Age Action Alliance, and DH Ministerial Working Party on the future of adult social care. So hugely experienced, and delighted that Sue is here today.
Thank you very much, Henry, and thank you for that introduction. I was asked to set the context here and give you a few figures in 5 minutes that underpins this excellent work of the inquiry. And we very much welcome the profile raising that's going on here to alert the nation to the state of our housing stock. For those of us that you don't know about us, we're coming up to 35 years of existence aiming to address poor housing conditions, particularly amongst older homeowners with low incomes. And we pioneered various types of services that did at one time move into the mainstream, and they're still very popular amongst older people. And a large part of what we do now is reflecting the voices of ignored older people and supporting older activism. And then you've heard about the policy shaping. So just to start with, have we got good homes? What's the state of play? Now, interestingly, in this country, we do have very good data about the state of the housing stock, and all the figures that you'll hear, the costings around the cost of the health service, it's underpinned by the English Housing Survey. Things have evolved and changed, definitions change over time, but we've got over half a century of information. And all the figures I'll give you come from the English Housing Survey. As David mentioned, we've got just over 24.4 million dwellings. And then if we look at the tenure of those, I think that's particularly interesting if we're thinking about good homes and how you tackle good homes. And we flatlined, we peaked at 76% home ownership, and that's largely flatlined. But the big change has been in this overtaking of the private rented sector by the social rented sector. That's all ages. But I think what I then want to hone in on is, what does this mean for the older population if we want to create homes where people age well? And this is really not a minority issue, the condition of the existing mainstream housing stock, because 9.5 million older households live in ordinary housing. And there's a valuable contribution made by the specialist and supported sector, but the policy emphasis has been very disproportionate. And if you read most things in the housing world, the only show in town seems to be retirement and specialist. As important that is, we've lost sight of the importance of making new mainstream homes age friendly and tackling the poor housing in the existing stock. And last but not least, I'll just flag up all these changes in tenure are very much, they're driven by government policy and fiscal policy and income policy and lending policy. And so what we're seeing now is we've got this high rate of home ownership, and that most of that growth took place in the 70s and 80s, and we've created a whole generation of low-income homeowners. So what's the state of this stock? Out of these 24.4 million homes, around 19% are non-decent, which, as this slide says, it is a shocking figure. Because we estimate that's 10 million people living in poor homes, and not far off half of those, 2 million of those homes, are lived in by someone over 55. And this is incredibly important for the state of people's health, because the main reason that homes are classified as non-decent is the presence of a hazard which poses a significant risk to the health of the occupant. And clearly that's important for all ages. But if you think about the main reason for a Cat 1 hazard is falls risk and a cold home exacerbating health conditions, you'll immediately see that the main people who suffer from the impacts of catastrophic impacts of falls are the aging population. And long-term health conditions, respiratory complaints, heart complaints, COPD, that again, there's a big impact there on the health of the aging population. Now, there tends to be these lazy assumptions about all older people are well off and all homeowners are well off. We've got an incredibly diverse older population. And if you think, we're looking here at the people 55 to 105 and all over the country in all sorts of homes. But if we mine the tenure of those non-decent homes, you'll see that it's very different for the all-age population compared to the older population. And 78% of the non-decent homes are lived in by older homeowners. And we have no fresh way. We've seen no initiatives since 2010 for tackling this. That was the year that all funding, dedicated national funding to support private sector housing disrepair ceased overnight. We've talked about the health and housing connections. And what I would flag up here is that we should be very concerned about the older old, where people spend more and more time at home on average. Of course, there's always the exception that proves the rule. But you see that people over 75, whereas it's flatlined the non-decent homes, in the private rented sector, it's improved, but for the over 75s, it's increased. So one of the reports that I think has been incredibly helpful, that was commissioned by the Centre for Ageing Better, that was written by the King's Fund, looked at homes health in COVID-19. I really would recommend this to you. And their assessment was that COVID had exposed and amplified housing-related health inequalities. And as we've just seen in the last few days, the data from Public Health England on healthy life expectancy and life expectancy and the inequalities in those have gone up yet again. And so there's been a very disproportionate impact, which is ongoing, of COVID-19. And I think housing, the spotlight has really been shone on housing through the COVID pandemic, particularly through the periods when people had to stay at home. And it became really the great divide as to whether you had a decent home or a non-decent home in the broadest sense, in terms of space, overcrowding, as to how well you survive that physically and mentally. We can put a price on this. Most of you will be familiar with the Building Research Establishment, where they've calculated the first year treatment costs alone. So this is a cumulative saving, if you reduce this, of 1.4 billion per annum. And then working with the Centre for Ageing and Better BRE, we mine that for the older population, and you've got over 500 million first year treatment costs alone for that age group. So there's the generic headlines about poor housing affects health. Absolutely it does. But if we're serious about improving the NHS performance, we've got to tackle the root causes. I'm speeding up, Henry. It is important that we do something about our existing housing stock as well as building new homes, as David has said, because 80% of the homes that we'll all be living in, those of us who, if any of us are still around in 2050, they're already out there. They've been built, and people live in all sorts of homes. They live in terraces, and again, we have to get away from the image that all older people live in a particular sort of housing. We are spread right across the housing stock, and retrofit is critical. And when we start to look at solutions, we absolutely have to take on board, where's the money coming from? It's not all going to come from national government. We've got a wide distribution of income patterns amongst our older population, and we have to take on board this hugely skewed distribution of housing equity by geographical location and socioeconomic group. The health argument, I think, has to be made very strongly. The NHS is really creaking. Adult social care is fractured, undoubtedly. There's lots of the right words about home from hospital, going home faster, keeping people at home, but very little thought about what the quality of the home is that you're trying to keep people in, particularly the older, the frail, the very ill. And housing retrofit could play, if it's targeted, tied in with the NHS, could play a critical role. And so my last slide is, I think we can be too defeatist about this. We have got to win over a lot of hearts and minds that government has any role when it comes to the state of the housing stock. And we should draw from the past. I'm a great one believing in lessons from history. And we saw revolutions in the state of our housing, the good quality homes that were built for people after World War I and World War II. Radical improvement in the availability of housing, transformation of the tenure, as you saw from my first graph. And in both cases, the leadership came from national government. There was a determination to improve the quality of homes for the whole population. And this inquiry report is so timely because we absolutely have to new vision, aspiration and ambition. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. A really powerful reminder of this critical link between the condition of our homes and our health, and also a reminder that if we put our minds to this challenge, as we have done in the past, we can create radical change. Please do keep up asking questions through the Q&A box. We've had some fantastic chat also going on in the box as well. Next, we have Sarah Cheeseborough from Britain Thinks. Sarah has worked across numerous areas, including welfare and work, housing, transport, energy, and environmental behaviours and consumer protection. She's a quantitative specialist originally, and Sarah is known for designing innovative mixed method research, particularly among vulnerable and low incidence groups, to ensure their voices are heard. And Sarah is going to be talking together with two of the participants from the Good Home Dialogue to share their experiences with us today. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Henry, for that broad introduction. I'm very much here today to represent the points raised by participants in the dialogue that Britain Thinks conducted to support this inquiry and is published alongside the inquiry report. And I'm delighted to be joined by Punita and Ray, who took part in the dialogue and will follow on immediately after me to share their experiences and what really matters to them in terms of action that needs to happen. So in short, bear with me, apologies, just going to take a second. There we go. The dialogue process involved nearly 90 people who we recruited from all walks of life and different tenures. But what everyone had in common is that they were facing an issue in their home of repair or maintenance or accessibility. And we brought people together with 14 housing professionals over a 3-week period to engage in discussion, debate, information exchange, and come to conclusions and recommendations that, as David said, could help keep testing the ideas that were being discussed for the inquiry. A reminder before we get into the discussion of the options of what David flagged up as how much our homes mean to us. Even if we're facing issues, we really value our homes and they mean a lot because of what's gone on in them. And that means a large number of us, even when facing issues, are content with the condition of the home. But that contentment can lead to some inertia that we need to tackle as the first barrier to making improvements in our home. And that goes along with some other barriers that people shared with us in the dialogue. We tend to downplay the severity of issues. Many of us can think about ways we've learned to live with workarounds, a broken fixture, or accept that that's the way things are, and perhaps we can't access all our home anymore. Many people face financial challenges when tackling repairs and improvements and perceive that repairs and improvements are a really expensive thing to take on. Finding a reputable tradesperson came up a lot in the discussion, and we could see how that feeds right through to the recommendations of the inquiry, or dealing with your landlord to get somebody in to fix a problem. And also not feeling capable of tackling the job yourself, either because of your own skills, or maybe your mobility isn't what it was, and you're accepting that as you grow older, that you need support. In the dialogue, we discussed who do we think is responsible for our housing stock, for maintaining good homes for the future. And absolutely everybody, it was felt that everybody has a role to play, from residents themselves to private and social landlords and local and national government. Homeowners acknowledge their responsibilities, but particularly as we grow older, we are looking for support in maintaining those homes. An important point that was raised was the benefits to society. And I'm thinking about, when we're talking about decarbonising homes or savings for the NHS, the more people look to the government to take the lead, because that benefit is going beyond your own occupation of that home. And as the absolute bottom line, people look to the government to ensure that our housing stock meets basic requirements for the standard of living. So over the dialogue, we raised 5 propositions, 5 options that were being considered by the inquiry that I'm showing on the screen now. And I'm just going to give you a flavour of the discussion of each one, much more detail in the report, and people gave really thorough consideration to the pros and cons of each option. The first option was more regulation of the housing stock, ensuring minimum standards across all tenures in our housing stock. People had mixed feelings about this, but there was most enthusiasm for regulation of private landlords, as long as tenants were protected from the repercussions in terms of rent levels. People wanted private landlords more enforcement. We then talked about what was called the Housing Quality Investment Fund, which is in essence using area-based initiatives to improve housing stock. And there was general support for investment, for government, national and local government investment, but people were concerned about whether area-based funding would really reach the right people. Both sort of, would it benefit people who didn't need it, or would it not reach people who lived in otherwise quite well-to-do areas? The third option was green loans. So loans to support environmental improvements that would have an environmental benefit. And again, people are enthusiastic about access to funding, but concerns were raised very strongly about borrowing money and getting into debt, particularly if you're retired now. So the dialogue focused on how can we help people to access capital in their homes safely and at fair rates, affordable rates that could help homeowners pay for their improvements. As David has touched on in terms of the ultimate recommendations in the inquiry, there was strong support for a local good home hub to help people access both advice, support, and particularly trusted tradespersons to actually carry out improvements. This met with a lot of enthusiasm across all tenures, but they're bringing everyone together and just knowing that you can get a job done well at a fair price. And slightly related to that, because when people considered all the options, we looked at how they could be combined. The home MOT appealed to many people. The idea of someone totally impartial coming into your home to give you constructive advice about what to prioritize, what's the first thing that you might need to tackle. But then linking that very much, we don't want that, people don't want that without linking it to solutions and practical support, i.e. the Good Homes Hub, where you can then find somebody to tackle that repair issue or improvement. So as well as considering the options, participants took all those away, brought their own ideas to the table, and came up with 8 recommendations that summarize the dialogue as a whole and reflect some of those things that I've touched on already. First thing was we need to address inertia and motivation. People need to feel capable and confident about repairing and improvement their homes. And that needs to relate to your own personal circumstances. We need to be specific about the benefits of improvements for your health or accessibility, even if those improvements are for the much longer term as well. All communication should be backed up with signposting to support and resources. Just messaging on its own is not going to work. Make sure that people don't feel pushed into making improvements. This came up in relation to decarbonisation, for example. Again, focus on what we want from our homes for the future, that there's the benefits of a safe, warm home that is free from hazards. Regulation, as I said, mixed feelings about regulation, but very concerned for tenants, any impact on tenants. And then the final points, as I've just touched on, are about helping people to safely and affordably access the capital in their home for improvements, to offer solutions, not just identify problems, and put people in touch with trusted tradespeople to carry out that work. So that's the end of the PowerPoint side of things. And I'm delighted if I can hand over to perhaps Panita, if you'd like to join us first to talk about your experience, the dialogue, and what matters, what you would like to see as a result of the inquiry. I'll just stop sharing slides.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, I'm Panita, and took part in the research that took place earlier this year. And it really struck a chord with me to think about not just myself, but the people that I live with who are older and in that bracket as well, that actually I would need to make changes to my home to help them to make their lives easier. And a lot of the stuff that Sarah's mentioned, you know, we really did talk about it all as a group, and really took on board some of the ideas that everybody was throwing out together, and really thought actually this could work. But for me personally, I found a lot of issues even in new build homes. The quality of the materials used to build the homes aren't as good as they were a few years back. You know, and when I look at some of the touch points that were mentioned, people even today still struggle with getting good tradespeople to come in and fix their homes or something. Everything's really expensive. So the whole thing really struck a chord with me, and it's really made me think about starting to save up a bit more to pay for those costs, etc. Because yes, it is going to cost a fair bit of money, and also that the older I get, I may not be as able to, you know, get in and out the house, for example, or I need support to get into the bathtub for a shower or something. So it was a great pleasure in doing this research, and it's really made me think about the future. And also it really made me think about the older people that we have in our country today living in these poor conditions, and what we can all do to help them improve those standards of living. Thank you.
Thank you, Panita. That's really helpful. And Ray, if I can hand to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ray, as you now know. Participation for me in this research was an eye-opener for many reasons that I'll come on to shortly. We've been married now, my wife and I, for 42 years, and we had a very quick look over the last few weeks of where we've lived and for how long. And we've moved 5 times in our property ownership life together. The first time we owned a property, we were there for 3 years. It was quite an old house, but we had the finances and the energy and the motivation to renovate and decorate, etc. Then we moved for a period of 4 years into the next house, and the same thing applied, really. We had the energy, the motivation, and then the children came along. And then we lived in the next house for 7 years, and the next house after that for 6 years, and our second child came along. But of course, when we moved into the house in which we live now, that was when I was 47, and I'm 68 years of age now. So that's 21 years in a house that we bought that was basically a new house, but built over an old property. So we had the best of both worlds there. But of course, when we moved in, I still had the energy and the motivation. And then the children grew up and left home. And we have, by comparison, a pretty big house. It's 1/3 of an acre, but it's got 4 large bedrooms and the surrounding buildings that go with it. So we possibly sound spoiled, but my God, as the years have gone by in the last 4 or 5 years, it's begun to take its toll on us. Things like the roof needs to be replaced, the dormer windows need replacing, and it really did hit home about the health of a home about 12 weeks ago, when halfway through this research period, in fact towards the end of this research, my dear wife had a bad fall in the garden and broke her left ankle. And of course that left me in a position where she couldn't help run the house at all. and our children lived so far away that they were unable to help. So we began to panic, and we didn't know what to do, really. We didn't know, apart from the local hospital, of course. But during that period of time, we actually panicked so much so that we became frightened about living in the middle of nowhere in the fens of Lincolnshire. And we felt so alone that we actually put our house on the market because we didn't know what to do. And to cut a very long story short, we have fortunately got a buyer, and we're moving now into Cambridgeshire, into a brand new house with all the latest green stuff that you can think of. Because, to be quite frank, we were terrified about losing our savings to put back into this house to bring it up to a comfortable, clean and healthy home standard. Until I started this research, housing stock didn't mean anything to me, but it has been an eye-opener, and it's made me realise that we all have a responsibility as an owner, temporary owners of the housing stock. But it's also opened my eyes, the fact that I'm not the only person that should share a responsibility for my home. It's made me realise that we are here to help the government maintain the housing stock in the UK. And really, it should be not necessarily a 50-50 contribution from each of us, but I would like to see the government do something to support us in accessibility to funds, as we've already said, to the labour groups support the rebuildings of it. So we've had so many experiences, wonderful and not so wonderful, in our home, and sadly we're going to have to leave this home because we can no longer maintain it. The reason I was pleased and proud to get into the Good Homes dialogue was really to give me the chance to hear what other people were thinking, like-minded people. And it gave me a chance to put my thoughts into that forum to hopefully come up with some plan to put to government to solve some of these problems. The other reason I wanted to get involved was to see if I can help change attitudes. As I said earlier, it's been a long haul the last 42 years. Now I'm getting older. I just simply can't maintain the home to the standards that I want to. I've also looked at the 5 proposals that you've heard. From our point of view, I think most importantly we should be looking at really are the Housing Quality Investment Fund, but working in conjunction with the other group, or the choice number 4, the local Good Home Hub. If we could have those 2 areas working in conjunction with each other, I think with a government inspectorate and a Minister of State at the head of it, it can solve a lot of these problems.
Thank you, Ray, and thank you, Panita. And Ray, I wish you and your wife all the best in your new home.
Thank you.
Thank you. Back to Henry.
Thank you so much, Sarah, Panita, and Ray. Hopefully you can see me again now. So we've got 15 minutes left, and we're going to try and cover as many questions as we can in that time. Please do keep them coming. One question which we've been asked both before this event and someone's also raised it now, which I'm going to kick off with, is about the government reshuffle, which we've been hearing about through yesterday and today. We have a new housing minister in Michael Gove. So I'm going to ask this firstly to David. What can we do to make sure that housing is top of the agenda for the new minister, and particularly thinking about our existing housing stock?
Truthfully, Henry, this is a question I've been trying to answer for 35 years, and I'm not sure that I've managed to come up with a compelling answer yet. But I, honestly, I think for some reason in this country, we've kind of thought of housing as being something different, something separate. You know, you talk about health and social care. We should be talking about housing, health and social care, but we don't connect things in that way. We've talked about winter deaths and the challenge that brings for the NHS, but we don't talk about how we improve the energy efficiency of our homes to reduce it. We don't make the connections. And I think from the research that we commissioned for this inquiry, it's overwhelmingly clear that if we could make this case about seeing our homes as a national asset, as a part of the core infrastructure of the country, and improve them, it would be economically beneficial for us. It would be socially beneficial for us. It would create a whole lot of new jobs. It would be a huge impact, a positive impact on the demands on the health service. And for some reason, the combination of those things, it's partly about departmental thinking in government. You know, you think about health, or you think about the economy, or you think about housing. The point about housing is that it has an impact on absolutely all of those things. And that is particularly true of our existing homes. So we need to have housing as part of the health service consideration as it creates these new forms, integrated care services. Whatever the format is, we need to make those connections. And I think that this has happened in my lifetime once or twice. We've managed to have housing ministers who have understood that and who have in their jobs made the case for housing. But we've not had that very often. And I think that's the big challenge that we now have with Michael Gove and whoever is in his new team. We need them to understand that they need to make the case for housing because of the positive impact it has in so many other places.
Thank you, David. Sue and Sarah, would you like to come in on that question?
Well, that's a very big question, how you shift massive movement in thinking as to what's the role of the state and what's the role of the individual, because that's fundamentally what we're up against. All I can say is that for, working with, I can't count the number of ministers over 30 odd years I've dealt with, and probably David's the same. If there's a human connection and they recognise what you're saying from their personal experience, that really does make a difference. So if they've, either at a constituency level or a family level, they've had any experience of housing and ageing problems, and that they see that doing something about the current home is a good thing to do, as opposed to, oh, my mother's such a stick in the mud and won't move. That makes all the difference. And one minister said to me is that if you come with solutions and not just problems, that's very welcome. So I think the inquiry comes with solutions with a well-argued case that there is a fiscal benefit. That's a plus. But I think the other areas, you look at what government is interested in and what it's saying it wants to do. And we're still hearing the words levelling up and building back better bandied about. And a lot of criticism of the proposals so far on levelling up. And I think we have to tie the arguments that we're making to the levelling up agenda, because some people have got very, very few choices in terms of moving house. It's fantastic Ray's got some choices. If you're at the bottom of the housing ladder living in Accrington or somewhere, you haven't got any choices if your house is in a poor condition and has got very little equity. So if we can focus on targeted solutions in those localities, that's a plus. And I think it's very interesting that a part of the country, which is the Greater Manchester area, which has a high proportion of very poor housing, an ageing population, huge health inequalities, and it's the only part of the country where they have the health budget. They are really interested in this and want to make a difference. And so we might have to have some pioneering areas, but they can't do it without any money at all. I think win hearts and minds, show how you tick the box on higher priority policy agendas, and then show how it can be done.
Thank you, Sue. Sarah, anything briefly to add?
I'll stay neutral, of course. Brendan thinks is here to work impartially and work. But I have the privilege of working across many departments, and yes, would echo everything David said about the need for cross-government strategy. But as far as hearts and minds, just to reflect on our gratitude to the participants in the dialogue, because it's the voices of people who are living in homes facing these challenges that will will impact on decision makers.
Can I come in here, Sarah, just to support what you've just said? We go round and round in this merry-go-round with government ministers changing portfolios, and they all become a little bit conversant with each portfolio, but experts in none of them, because they keep changing. It's all very well saying what are the problems, and somebody else just said quite recently, bring solutions to the table. But where it falls down is having identified the problem and then sorted the solution, identified the solution as well, there's no action. There's no action because there's no accountability. And it has to be for the simple people like myself and, dare I say, Punita, that need to hold these people to the fire. And at the moment, there is no accountability. And we have this simple, idiotic system of electoral systems where we vote people out and vote somebody else in. It goes round and round and round and round. So I'm not so sure central government's a solution, because they're proving time and time again to be, dare I say, totally and utterly incompetent or disinterested in the ordinary people of our society. And me, a 67-year-old guy that's pushing 70, we're getting fed up with no action, no solutions and no accountability. It's got to stop somewhere.
Thank you very much, Ray.
Henry, can I just come in briefly on that? I know there's a lot of other questions, and I'm going to address at least one of the others here. But that frustration that Ray's just been talking about, politicians have to start hearing that, because it's very widespread. This sense that there's a lot of chat and no action. And in the Q&A, David Petrie has asked whether we should encourage the government at Westminster to look to the housing strategy that's been developed in Scotland. Yes, absolutely, definitely. Because one of the things that is a real challenge for us is that housing investment and the product that we create is inevitably very, very long term. And governments are much more comfortable with very, very short timescales. And I think if we had a housing strategy in place that was at least about the principles and a series of objectives that the whole country could get behind, then there is the chance of having something that is a bit more consistent and a bit more long-term. And, it's always going to be the case that a Conservative government will focus more on opportunities for owner occupation, and a Labour government will focus more on opportunities for renting. But they can do that within the context of a broader housing strategy. And I think if you look around the world, there are many countries, we say we can't do these long-term strategies. Of course we could. And there are many countries around the world that do it. And it makes a difference, because then you can invest confidently over time. The Slovakian government has a long-term strategy to deal with the fact that 85% of their housing stock is 15 years older than the anticipated lifespan of that housing. And because they've approached it strategically, they're making huge strides to be able to improve that housing and improve people's lives. And there are examples, not just in Scotland, but all around the world. And I recently, in a conversation with Eddie Hughes, who is a minister in MHCLG, or at least he isn't, he might not be by this afternoon, but he was until then, I actually suggested to him he should look to that strategy in Scotland. He wasn't keen to give the SNP any kind of credibility, but he was keen to look at what a decent housing strategy might look like. That's where we have to be starting from. Get government to think strategically.
Can I just say very briefly, we don't have to look that far. It's not perfect because of the financial constraints, but you look across the border into Wales and they have 100% coverage of care and repair agencies. Yeah. They've got 100% coverage of handy person services that can deliver what health and hospitals need. And you can tell, I agree with Ray, local authorities are key to this, but if they haven't got the money to do the things they need doing in their locality, because national government is saying no funding for the existing housing stock, they're very limited.
Thank you, Sue. I think we've got time for one more question. I know that actually, as part of the answers to the other question, a lot was covered that people have been asking about, but there's one specific that I wanted to to ask you about, which is something that we've been relying on so much throughout the pandemic, which is all about digital inclusion. Many of us have been carrying out meetings, going to events virtually, but there are still far too many people who are digitally excluded. What can we do to bring those people into the digital world and to help them with digital proficiency? I'm going to start with Sue. I think you might have some particular insights into this from your work.
Okay. Well, again, this is an element where you're compounding disadvantage. If I look at, we've talked to the fantastic service going on in Manchester with Manchester Care and Repair. They contact every older person who's discharged from hospital with their offer of practical help and practical housing help. And we talk about digital inclusion. They say virtually everybody they contact, at least 3/4 are not online. They're not connected. They try the best, but some people are going to need a family, a friend, a broker, because who I think about my mother with dementia, who died not long ago, but there was no way I was ever going to bring her into the digital age. And so there are, so in terms of the health, the priority groups, there's some people who you're going to have to broker. But then there are some very successful initiatives where you're helping people both with the hardware and the software and linking up across the generations to support through the practical things. And so I feel like with so many of these things, we actually know what to do. We've got the evidence of how to do it well, be it from small repairs, minor works, information and advice, thinking and planning ahead workshops, but then after a pilot, they stop. And so what's the real key for digital inclusion is to take together all these little initiatives that have got particularly mushroomed through COVID and have something concerted, some concerted effort to spread the good practice everywhere. But we have to accept we're not going to get 100% coverage.
Thank you, Sue. We are nearly out of time, unfortunately. I think we could spend many hours on this topic, and as I said before, we will do our very best to answer any questions that we didn't cover after the event. I wanted to just finish off by saying a few words about what Aging Better will be doing to carry forward the recommendations of the inquiry. I've just got a brief slide to show which covers these. So there are 3 areas. David has talked a lot about the Good Home Agency concept. So we're going to be campaigning to government to establish this national network and working with our partners in Lincolnshire County Council, who we're delighted have been on this webinar, have been active in the chat. The second theme is around addressing the fact that we need a more comprehensive mix of finance mechanisms. This is one of the biggest barriers that we've learned about that people face. And then the third is more about consumer guidance and raising awareness that helps people to improve their homes and inform decisions about moving as well if they choose. So I'd like to say a huge thank you again to all the panelists, David, Punita, Ray, Sue and Sarah, for what has been a fascinating webinar. Really encourage you all to continue in the debate. Highly recommend the final report of the Good Home Inquiry, and please do continue to get in touch with your thoughts and comments on this vital area of work. Thank you very much, everyone.